design. For anyone who's new here, I want to share, our basically our mission and our goal for UXEU. We're a community for the next wave of UX professionals to find resources, connections, and strategic guidance for successfully transitioning into UX careers. As a person who is on the come up with you all, this community has been super awesome in helping us continue our UX journeys. And it really all started on Meetup. So let's talk a little bit about that. Meetup is where we host all of our events or invite people to our events. So if you're not following us there yet, please do. There are also so many awesome events to check out across other organizations. Of course, you can also find us on Instagram. Make sure you're following us today. And if you're posting some of our content today or following along the conversation there, please tag us so we can find you and share your story, etc. We love to hear from you on various channels. And of course, last but not least, our Slack community is popping, as I like to say. We talk about everything. There's a Slack channel for introverts and there's job opportunities, Slack channels in there too. Shout out to the amazing people in here who help make that community great. And with that, I think that I'll toss it back to you, Michelle. Thank you all to the panelists for being here. Michelle, for moderating. You're awesome. And hi, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Cool. Thanks, everyone, again for being here. I could not be more excited for our panel today. So as Pamela mentioned, I'm Michelle. I'll be your moderator. I'm also one of the organizers on UX Come Up, and I'm also on the Come Up with you all as well, kind of getting ready, hopefully, to become a UX researcher. So for today's event, our May event, we're celebrating Asian Voices in Design with AAPI Heritage Month. And for those of you who might not know, AAPI stands for Asian American Pacific Islander, and this community is super vast. It's included but not limited to the East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian, Filipino, and Pacific Islander communities. And with that, I definitely want to acknowledge how beautifully vast the AAPI community is, and that this is just one perspective of this diverse community that we're celebrating today. Before we kick it off officially, I did want to give a shout out to Sharon. She can wave. She didn't know I was going to do this, but we were inspired to do this event partly by her post that she made to spread awareness about hashtag Stop Asian Hate, and particularly call out attention to wealth gaps both between the AAPI and other communities, but also even within the AAPI community. And she's a personal friend of mine too, and I really leaned on her to help brainstorm some of the topics for this event. So really would not have happened without her. And on that note, we definitely want to hear more from you all, our community. If there's any topic that you're passionate about or you want to hear about, definitely please let us know, reach out to one of us or post in the community channel so we can all see it and kind of figure out, what we can offer this community and what you all want to hear from us. And great, so as usual, we'll try to leave around 15-20 minutes at the end for questions. Please try to save it until that time just so it's easier for our team to grab those questions. But otherwise, you've probably noticed our chat is popping, so please share your reactions, thoughts, comments as you're going. The only thing I'll ask is to remind you all to stay on mute if you're not speaking. And with that, we'll get started. So I could not be more excited to welcome our 5 amazing panelists today. And I'll just ask them to kind of kick it off and introduce themselves. And as part of their introduction, if you could include what you think is the one most important trait a leader should have, we'll kind of use that to get our discussion started. And I'll just go in the order of the panelists on my screen. So I think it's Juan, Grace, Roger, Nitesh, and then Margaret. So Juan, if you can kick us off.
Hi, I'm Juan Citron. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge the East Coast, West Coast vibe there. I'm based in the Bay Area now, but Queens, New York has always been my home, and I've lived there most of my life. So represent, and I miss the pizza from back there. I'm a design lead at YouTube, and I've also been a design lead and design manager for Disney Plus, ESPN apps, and CBS digital suite of products. So thank you again for having me, and I look forward to having a good chat with you all. Oh, I'm sorry. This is what happens when I'm the first one. An example of an important trait that all leaders have, at least from my experience, has been building and maintaining trust.
Awesome. Grace, if you want to go next.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm Grace. I'm currently a product designer at Electronic Arts in our technology org. So I don't work on games, but I work on mostly enterprise and some marketing products. On the side, outside of work, I run Design Buddies. I see a lot of you in Design Buddies in the chat. I just shared this event, Design Buddies, as well. We're a 21,000 member community aimed to just demystify design and let anybody interested in design to connect. On the side, I create games and I make anime art, and I really like drawing anime art and running and blogging. And I used to table at anime conventions with my own booth before the pandemic. And I recently graduated from undergrad studying bioengineering and computer science engineering. I was actually pre-med before deciding to pursue my career in design and found my way into community building that way. And what I think the most important trait of a leader is self-awareness and knowing your strengths and weaknesses and focusing on those strengths. Thank you.
Roger, if you want to go next.
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Roger, and it's not my real name, but that's okay. And right now, I'm a product designer in Facebook. And right now I live on West Coast in Seattle. But before that, I was working at a startup in Boston for 4 years and seeing kind of the company going from 20 people to 200 people and see how the design team grows as well. And before that, I was a design consultancy. My background is in industrial design. I studied industrial design at Rhode Island School of Design. And that kind of transitioned myself into UX along the way. And really happy to be here. And thank you for everyone who has invited me. I would say, for me, the most important thing for me to look into the leadership is this person's a sense of focus and focus on mission, focus on and working on something for a prolonged period of time. So it's the focus. Thank you.
Cool, Nitesh.
Hey everyone, I'm Nitesh. I'm originally from India and I'm currently in San Jose, California. I'm currently working as a senior product designer and design ops lead at Synopsys. And prior to this, I was at IBM for 5.5 years. And prior to that, I kind of like came to the US to pursue my master's in software engineering. So I personally have transitioned from being a developer to a product designer, and I've faced like lots of hurdles and pushbacks to kind of do this transition. So that's how I kind of started, like, and I could transition beyond like so many people and so many leaders and so many designers and non-designers who kind of helped me get into this. So that's how I wanted to like also help others who are trying to transition. And that's how I got to like Design Buddies, and I met Grace and many other leaders who have been like shaping up the design communities. And I've also been a part of ADB List and constantly talking to designers and trying to see if I can help anyone in any way. And I think one important trait that I've noticed from like many leaders is mostly about not just being leaders themselves, but also trying to identify and help others to be leaders. Providing that opportunity and direction towards helping others to get into some sort of leadership is also something that I always have noticed to be like very important. So yeah, thanks for having me though.
Last but not least, Margaret.
Hi, I'm Margaret Lee. I am a UX director at Google. I lead a program that I founded 5 years ago called UX Community and Culture, which is all about empowering the UX organization at Google, which is, I think, over 4,100 people at this point globally. I started that program after having led the Google Maps team for about 9 years and seeing the evolution of UX as a profession over that time and seeing what level of investment could really empower the UX organization. So that's what I've been doing. But I also have a little bit of that East Coast, West Coast thing. I was born and raised in Boston, schooled in Philadelphia, and I've had most of my career out here in the Bay Area. One leadership consideration that I like to think about is that it's not just the what of what we do, what we're responsible for. It's not just about the deliverables and the designs and you know, the artifacts. It's the how, you know, the how of how we get there, how we work together. The respect that we bring to our users is equally important, if not more, than the actual what.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, for introducing yourselves and for kicking it off with some of those nuggets. I think we love grabbing quotes and dropping them in the chat and getting our reactions. It's definitely great nuggets there. And I think kind of the first question I'd love to kick it off with, kind of thinking about the traits that you all mentioned, is sharing potentially some examples of leadership that have really stood out to you, whether good or bad, and maybe reflecting on some of these traits that you mentioned. I don't know if you want to go in the backwards order, maybe of where we just went. Margaret, sorry to put you on the spot. You can start there, and of course, if you want to jump in out of turn, please feel free.
Just repeat that question one more time,
yeah,
totally. So I make sure I have it.
Yeah, just kind of thinking about what you mentioned as an important trait in a leader. Also, the question is examples of leadership that have stood out to you, whether it was for a good reason or potentially even a bad reason.
Yeah, I think one thing I've been thinking a lot about personally is just acknowledging mistakes, acknowledging what we call failure, and not stigmatizing it, whether it's something that might have happened on somebody on your team or for yourself, being really able to basically own up to something that didn't go well. I think it's an incredibly important way to role model the culture that you want to build on your team, which is one of trust and one of being able to take risks and innovation. And I think really part of that is making it okay to so-called fail, So that's one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, because this past year, frankly, has been really hard. And I think we've been really hard on ourselves in general. And we shouldn't hold ourselves necessarily to the same standards as, 2019. So.
Yeah, I love that. I think we talk about representation a lot in the AAPI community as well. So even just representations of not just our identity, but seeing examples of failing and learning from that. I think that's really awesome.
Yeah.
Nitesh, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I think mostly focusing on design scenarios that we kind of look at. I think for me, it's more like when someone's trying to come up with some sort of a plan or a new idea, there's going to be lots of pushback or there's so much force that you need to take on. And I think having that sort of a vision and also the ability to put your thoughts out there is kind of very important, even though it's not always something that's supporting you. And I think from leadership perspective, you always don't have to be in a position, the title that doesn't give you that sort of leadership, but it's just your vision towards creating something. And I've recently heard in another talk when I was which I was part of, which is trying to be a missionary versus a mercenary is something that's always kind of that kind of makes a difference in trying to build something for your team or for people you work with. And it's something very important to kind of look towards, as well as just what we are doing in the team or your work.
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't want to have to respond to every single one. I don't want to take up too much time on the panel, but I think that really connects back to what you were saying also about, not just being leaders, but finding leaders. And I know part of what we wanted to do on this panel was finding leaders from a wide range of backgrounds, both showing up in leadership in different ways, and kind of asking that question, what does it mean? Yeah. Roger?
I can jump in next. And I want to double down on what Margaret, you said earlier. And I think also once you mentioned earlier as well about building trust in the team. I didn't put that into kind of my priority list, maybe because I think I was lucky as self-reflecting. I think I was lucky always being on a team that people trusting each other. But I can definitely understand having a trust is so important. And I think it was a study run by Google that essentially the team that performed the best is not necessarily the team with the kind of most diverse team members or all the other thing is about the people on that team feels very comfortable actually kind of saying things or saying that, oh, this idea may not be right. And so that gives people the safety of actually being able to say something might be wrong. If you are not in that kind of environment, it's really hard to actually get the team to move to the right direction. The reason for me personally to say a sense of focus is because right after I graduated, I was working in design consultancy, and at the time we were helping a startup kind of coming out of it. The startup was focusing on wearable technology, and I was doing design consultancy work for them. And the two founders came out of MIT. One is engineering background, one is an MBA. Both of them great people, but I would say that the people who is running the company was not great at focusing on his time, and they got lots of great kind of press, and they raised 28 million for the first round, which is awesome, and the company kind of grew up really quickly, but I think the CEO at the time was focusing much more on going to different conferences and promoting the company name, and he was just not very focused, and the company ran really hard and then kind of closed down really quickly as well, ran out of all the money. And so I guess in some ways I feel lucky. I was kind of looking at that example as an advisor or kind of as a consultant on the side, but definitely kind of struck me on the importance of being a focus, especially as a founder, as a leader. The company I joined as a startup is called Panorama Education in Boston. The founder himself, I think when I was doing the interview and also working with him over the years, he also is very, very focused. He is very rarely distracted by all those fancy titles or something that kind of not important to the business kind of bottom line. And he always rather spending time on making a sales call, close the sales loop, and as well as kind of thinking about the product itself a little bit more and actually shipping the product. So, and I think that maybe because I come from very much like a startup background, I would say that being able to really focus and prioritize time has been great. And this is one of the traits I look up to as a leader.
I'm hearing a lot of like focus come up in a lot of the discussion, and something I took out of that as well was the sense of like authenticity and being genuine. I know that's important to me as well, but in terms of like not caring about titles and things like that, like really focusing and caring about the work and the people. I think that's awesome. Grace?
Yeah, thanks y'all for sharing. I definitely think vulnerability in a sense kind of builds trust because it normalizes feeling certain ways. So an example of that would be the senior manager and director of my team at EA. So a few months ago, I went through the largest burnout of my life. And I remember just sharing that on LinkedIn because I felt like it. I felt like it would be relatable. And they reached out and shared their stories as well, basically helping me normalize what I was feeling. So I feel like because of this like psychological safety and vulnerability that they shared with me, I felt like more connected, more like I trust them more. And part of that reason why, how they make me feel like really included, like even, so I started at EA in June of 2020, and that was when I was an intern, and I later took on full-time in December. And what made me want to take on full-time was because I trusted the leadership on my team, and also they made me feel really included. So I feel like as a leader, it's important to be like vulnerable and like normalize feeling certain ways. Because before, because of the environment I kind of grew up in, it was like hyper competitive. So I would always be the one chasing titles. But then at the end of the day, I think as a leader, I think of it as like a role model, and just like flexing about my stats doesn't help anyone. So I always try to frame my point of view, just like seeing how I can empathize, share my story, normalize things, and make people feel good, make people feel like their experiences are validated. So it kind of shifted throughout the years, but definitely I feel like leaders' vulnerability and also sharing things to make people feel validated and uplift other people. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to echo what everybody before me has also said. You know, I also think that like the examples of really good leadership, even expanding upon the trust factor, is that you great leaders hold themselves accountable for what they're committing to, what kind of deadlines they're working with the quality of their work, and that really continues to maintain trust, especially as you go into deeper and deeper problems where it gets even more complex. And especially with great leaders, they figure out how to elevate their team and make everyone else around them better. And on the opposite end of that spectrum is where I've seen bad cases of leadership throughout my career, or once where insecurity kind of plays a factor in how they approach their work. And it also ends up being overly political, where it affects not just how you do the work, but also what kind of work you and your team may end up doing. So I know politics exist in every company, especially larger companies. But I've also been fortunate to see really great leaders know how to navigate the politics and still make sure that the work can be done as best as possible.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Oh, go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah, I'd love to just add on to a couple of things. The point about politics and just basically, we exist in a shifting landscape, right? It's very rare that things are the same, 6 months out from when we started a plan. Things inevitably shift. And I think a good leader, sometimes we see it as politics, but sometimes it's because context is changing all the time. And a good leader will help to contextualize the changes and the shifts so that the team can still align to the, wait, why are we doing this? Like, why did we take this shift? Or how does this align with whatever we started before? And, Roger, you were mentioning focus. I think sometimes all these things can get conflated. Is it because like somebody doesn't have a vision, or is it because there's some complex thing happening way above our pay grade that we don't, aren't privy to? But how do you keep the team focused in the face of complexity and change is a really, it's a skill. I think that's a skill that good leaders can practice, because it basically lets you do your job really well without being saddled with all the noise. A good leader will just make it almost appear like there's nothing going on, and you're still able to just do your best. And so it's a lot of times it's what you don't see as well.
I love that. I also love seeing the mutual head nods. Miguel was my General Assembly instructor, and he'd always say head nods to make sure we're all listening. But great to see that it resonates with a lot of people. I think I heard so many amazing nuggets there, just talking about focus, accountability, vulnerability, not stigmatizing. A lot of we think of leaders as representing us or wanting to set an example, but an example that's grounded in kind of authenticity and vulnerability. I think that's great. And kind of along those lines, but shifting gears a little bit, part of the reason that we thought this would be a really relevant topic, especially during AAPI month, is I know personally, I feel like I see, UX isn't only about tech, but in the tech industry, there tends to be a lot of AAPI representation. I don't think people think Asians are underrepresented in tech, but I do think it seems like they are underrepresented in leadership. So I kind of would love to pose to you all maybe your thoughts on potentially why you think that is, if that is something you agree with, why you think that is. And along those lines, what you think are some potentially unique cultural strengths that we as people of AAPI descent can bring to leadership positions. If anyone wants to, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I'll jump in. And I think it's what you said, Michelle, is definitely true. And you can see that in the data that I would say Asian Americans are kind of fairly represented in the tech, especially in entry-level jobs. But whenever you go to the management level or leadership level, you just don't see those faces. And I think it's even worse for Asian women who kind of identify themselves as a woman in those kind of areas. It's actually probably even worse there. So you see those in numbers. I don't know the root cause of it. And the one thing I definitely want to say is that I think for me, coming from the cultural backgrounds I grew up, sometimes kind of advocate for yourself and be active as participant in a conversation is something that I would say myself not doing really well. And I think those are usually the time that there's a difference between kind of leadership versus actually kind of being individual contributors. So my point I want to make is that being able to kind of jump in and kind of being an active contributor in a conversation and in your workplace, I think is probably a first step of letting kind of all the APIs going up into the management and leadership.
I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, but I don't want to hog the conversation. I mean, yeah, I wrote an article about this. It's on Medium and also on Google Design. If you're interested, it's called Insights from a Reluctant Leader. And I talk about this very phenomenon of why aren't there more underrepresented groups in leadership, right? And for me, it just, one day I was just like, why is it that we see such commitment from big corporations, global corporations that have representation around the world towards diversity, inclusion, and equity, when we actually haven't re-examined the goalposts? So it almost seemed absurd to me that we were making this big commitment to DEI, you know, as an industry, yet we weren't actually changing anything to make it more viable for us to be inclusive, right? Because it's not just a numbers game. It's not just the hiring piece. It's the inclusive piece. Like, do people feel like they belong? Do they have a career trajectory within the company once they're in there? And I, you know, from my perspective, it's very much tied to the expectations of leadership in corporate America. Look one way, you know, they look like the person who's willing to get up on stage and be really bold and visionary, which are all great things. But like I said, that's the what, you know, we don't actually value as much the how in leaders. And I think actually culturally, I've seen a lot of, you know, folks from AAPI backgrounds have remarkable facility in terms of being really great people managers, or, you know, really good at facilitation, right? Really good at consensus building, really good at collaboration, but not necessarily as good at being really bold and having your ego out there, you know, to sort of express a vision. And I'm, you know, I know this sounds very generalized, but that's been my experience. And so I'm challenging all of us to say, like, well, maybe it's not us that has to change. Maybe it's the systems and the processes that have to actually meet us in the middle. Like, why don't we value the traits, you know, that we aren't currently valuing, that I believe are equally important to leadership? To your first question, like, what makes a good leader?
Yeah, it's so great to speak after Margaret. I've read your article, and it's also a pretty big defining point in how I approach here, and also just kind of helped me make a decision about coming here to YouTube and Google. You know, one thing I wanted to kind of express, especially with a group of designers, is that it's possible for you to craft and climb up your ranks doing the things that you're passionate about. If you're passionate about building teams and you know, helping your team elevate and do their work, that is a very not specialized, because it's a very important skill set that you really need to focus on. And similar to Roger's note around focus, like you need to be willing to go deep into that kind of problem space in order to help your team and to not make it just about yourself. Whereas as designers, a lot of designers love the craft portion. A lot of designers love, you know, obsessing over color, obsessing over the photography, you know, doing the motion, doing the animation. And I've been at various points in my career where I was a younger designer previously in a different company, where all of a sudden I had direct reports and I had design agencies that were waiting for my feedback. And that was completely shocking to me. And thankfully, my manager, my creative director at that time, kind of helped guide me and steer me in how to pick up that kind of responsibility. And then I've been able to kind of go back and forth in my career, where there were times where I was a full-on manager, and I had to be focused in the how and making sure the team was well fed. But I was also able to go back to being a craftsmanship portion, because I knew that spending 40 to 50 hours a week in the meetings can drain me, because I'm not that kind of personality that wants to be up on stage and being very extroverted. I wanted to also be able to have time to focus, put the headphones on, and be in the shop mode and make things too. So I think as you guys are figuring out how to move on in your careers, think about the things that you're really passionate about and craft your own kind of design career. Don't think that the system means that you have to eventually be in the boardroom and have the suit and be in that kind of executive management. That's not what heavyweights do on a daily basis.
Yeah, I love what you said about crafting your design career and your own career. Doesn't mean you have to be like, oh, extroverted all the time. In fact, I can relate. A lot of people think I'm like an extrovert, but really meetings all day drain me. I'm really good at acting. That's what I kind of describe myself as. And another trait I would like to add is I feel like harmony is something that's valued in Asian culture, kind of keeping the peace and being able to speak up when problems arise and really understand all sides of the story to de-escalate situations and in terms of like politics and everything like that. Because I feel like all times these conflicts just come from lack of understanding each other. Another trait is, from my background, my parents are from Taiwan and Singapore, and they came to the US for grad school. They really value education a lot. So I was always taught to be curious. And I feel like oftentimes it's just from my own personal experience being Asian American with immigrant parents, like definitely like a lot of pressure to succeed in like STEM academics, but I feel like curiosity helps me like push outside the box. I always like ask questions and just not afraid to take things to the limit. And I feel like that's something I've also seen in my Asian American peers and everything too. So curiosity, not being afraid to ask questions, even though I feel like growing up, I was definitely told I shouldn't question things. But as I get older, I feel like we should all just use our voice and don't listen to anybody who doesn't tell you to speak up, because you have a voice and you can. And if people don't respect it, then just keep challenging authority and things like that. And just keeping curious and try to keep peace and understand both sides and not just question things, but making sure you're not harming anyone and keep everything in harmony is kind of a piece of advice I would like to share that kind of got moved into my answer as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in, but don't know if y'all can catch the chat, but we always talk about bars. People are dropping bars. People love what you're saying. 100 emoji, sheesh, all that stuff. So I think we have some amazing nuggets, and that got me thinking a lot of what you all said about, kind of, I've been thinking a lot about it too, how we as a society have decided like what success looks like or what a leader looks like, and challenging that stereotype. And even, I guess, for us, so my next question is, knowing that, there is a stereotype out there that Asians don't speak up, or maybe it is kind of ingrained in us early on, just in terms of like harmonizing and things like that. How do we challenge that stereotype? And at the same time, any advice you have for UXers or people in general, just on how to advocate for themselves? I know I personally, that's something I struggle with too. Like, it makes me really uncomfortable, and it's hard to like take ownership of what you're doing. So would love any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I was gonna also add, I think this kind of resonates a lot with many experiences that I've had, especially trying to like navigate between your career paths. And like, for example, I've had like some of the I would say weird and also a unique scenario. I don't know if everyone's faced something like that, but like, for example, I was like, when I started working at Synopsys, I think like my first day of my work was the last day of my hiring manager, which is kind of like so she was like VP of design and who hired me, and we had like a lot of different discussions during hiring. And when I joined, I just got like a document that says onboarding, and it was kind of a very different scenario, and it's not expected that you would probably start your day in that way in your new job. And also it's more like I think the entire team that I joined, and we are like a very small team within the company. We are like about 9 to 10 designers for the entire company, and everyone were kind of like in a shock, and it was kind of a toxic environment at that point of time when I joined. And it's not just about like, blaming a scenario rather than like taking up that ownership or like facing challenges is something like, I think it naturally comes with different scenarios that you face, and every problem that you face in your like previous job or previous year kind of adds up to you taking like bold decisions. When I tried to like come to US for like my graduation, like my student visa was rejected like 5 times, and I lost like 1 year of my like work or education because I was just waiting on a visa. And it's nothing to blame with, and it could happen to anyone, but that kind of made me stronger, that if suddenly something happens to my visa or anything that's related to me working in US, like away from family and stuff, it's not gonna like hit you as hard as it would have hit you like the first time. So, and it makes you stronger, definitely. And that probably kind of didn't hit me when what happened at Synopsys. So I kind of like literally jumped upon that kind of scenario to kind of help my team build into like what it is right now. Like I could have like maybe even chosen to leave it because it's not what was promised or what was discussed, but it's just that you decide that you could definitely help the scenario rather than like thinking of other scenarios or opportunities. And I think it just makes you stronger. So if anyone's kind of like facing a different or difficult scenario with work, I think it's probably something that's going to add up to your future self, which kind of makes you stronger. Or and you would probably realize it when you go get into the future and look back, and you think that everything adds up for you to become a stronger person. And right now I think like we have built everything that's needed or missing when something that happened to my team when I joined. And right now, like for example, we have like an entire onboarding guide for a new designer who's coming into the team, instead of just a doc which I got. We have like a research repository that I've built, and like all of us, like my entire team has built together, but someone had to like take that stand. And it's also not easy for one to listen to you when you're actually new on the team, and and they're just used to like a different set of working style, right? So it's more like I just did what I can, which is like just schedule one-on-ones with everyone on the team and try to like involve myself. And probably I also used to tell them that, sorry, I'm pretty good at disturbing people, so can I disturb you for some time, kind of a thing, when I'm just trying to ping them and trying to get to know more, so that I wanted to understand what the scenario is and how we can build our team. So it always has helped trying to be a better leader. And it's not just, like I said, about what your title is, and it's about like how you can contribute to the entire team. And initial pushback has always made me stronger. And I think it's a good way if you look at it from like one perspective.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I can jump into. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, Grace, go ahead. Go ahead,
okay.
Grace.
Yeah, I was looking at the last question in the chat about challenging stereotypes about how Asians don't speak up, kind of bouncing off my point. So I guess an example I give is during salary negotiations and not asking permission to ask. And what that means is kind of like when I negotiated my salary, I was like, I would like this amount because of this and this. So like keep like a factual data of like what I contributed and like local salary rates, and ask like, does this work? So it might seem small, but just like not asking permission to ask kind of comes a long way, because you become seen as more bold, you get right to the point, and you seem like you have more confidence in your answer. And that's another piece of advice I would like to give, because I didn't know that before until like I worked with a mentor and he told me that I should be just going straight to the point instead of like asking, hey, can I ask this? Another tip is just like be yourself at work. Like, for example, I love drawing, I love emotes, I love like kawaii cute things, and I am like not afraid to add those emotes to my work Slack and use them to my coworkers all the time, and just being unapologetically yourself and not letting anybody tell you otherwise. If people judge you, then that's not your vibe. It's okay. It's not your job to please everyone. Just be yourself and be proud of who you are. And yeah, thank you.
That's awesome, Grace. I'm a little bit slow, so I'm still reflecting on Michelle's question earlier about kind of how to advocate for yourself. I'm also a little bit slow that I'm still reflecting on Margaret, your question about can the system need a different type of leaders? I thought about what Margaret you said, and right now I'm looking at the CEO of Google and CEO of Microsoft, and I read the CEO of Microsoft's book. I think they are in some ways a different type of leaders. They're different from Steve Ballmer. They're different from Steve Jobs, and so I think maybe it is the system may be changing, and it is changing in some ways. And for the questions about advocating for yourself, I love the point that Grace you made about not asking for permissions. I think that this is a kind of really, really helpful tip for everybody out there. And for me as an immigrant, I think that sometimes not asking for permission is probably a great way. Meanwhile, my own self, I think one of the feedbacks I got and one of the things I learned throughout the years in terms of advocating for yourself is that usually people are busy and they think about themselves, and that's the same probably goes to your managers and some of your coworkers. So if you really, really want something, and coming back to the focus part, be clear about what you need. Most people, like they're busy with their life, they probably won't remember what you ask for. If you can be a little bit more persistent about some of the things that you needed for your career or for your job, I think that that's a great way to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, and I just want to reinforce, like, you are your best advocate. And there will be times in your career when somebody will ask you, whether it's a manager or an executive or a design peer or even an intern that that's on your team, they'll ask you, so what do you want to be doing? So always be prepared about how you're going to answer that, because that can change the trajectory of your careers very quickly.
Yeah, I would +1 everything that's been said, and also recognize that you don't have to go it alone, right? Like yes, you are your own best advocate, but you can also, in that process, identify who could help you, who could be a good thought partner as you're thinking about approaching your manager about some difficult question or whatever. Just develop sort of your board of directors that can advise you for different scenarios in your life. You don't have to go it alone, because it can be scary if you're not culturally brought up to boldly advocate for yourself. It can feel really uncomfortable, but you don't have to go it alone. There's plenty of others around you that would be willing to help if you just ask, because to others' point, people are really busy and they're not going to recognize that you might need a hand. So.
Awesome. I'm definitely loving this discussion, how we're all kind of building upon everything else we've talked about in the almost past hour. I do want to leave enough time for questions, so I'll kind of open it up to the chat, let people start thinking of questions they might have. But as we're setting that up, I think I have one, maybe 2 more questions before we move into that portion. We've been kind of discussing in our community chat a little bit, thinking about identities and all of our unique identities. I think for some people, different parts of their identity are visible versus not. And kind of thinking about, I asked a little more generally earlier, like what are some unique cultural strengths that API community might bring to their work and to leadership? But kind of to make it a bit more personal potentially, what impact you think that your particular background or identity or experiences have had on your work, and if that's something that you actually actively think about? Like, are you bringing your identity into your work every day, or is it, you know, more subconscious or something like that? It's kind of a deep question, I think, but.
Yeah, I think like bringing your identity has always been like underrated in the trends that you see, and mostly people try to fit into what's the theme or, you know, the scenario within the team or a specific task, but in reality, like, you being yourself brings more diversity and a unique strength to the team. So it's always kind of like not probably focused until a later point where you probably feel like, oh, I should have just, you know, until and unless someone else is like appreciated for something that you have but you haven't shown, until then you don't try to focus on it sometimes, and which is kind of like probably like you probably have to like somehow express yourself either by writing or speaking to someone, which could probably show your identity apart from like what you could just bring in to work.
Yeah, Michelle, I want to answer your question. So I grew up in China, and growing up in China, I think the news I consume and the education I got was very much different theory compared to kind of United States. When I read news in China, it was very much what you read about China today in New York Times. So coming to United States, I think it was a different experience, and just rebooting the quote unquote operation system of how I see the world. That was a big culture shock to me. But I think that even like nowadays, I think I get better kind of holding two set of ideas, theories, or opinions, and kind of simultaneously, and not necessarily say one is right or wrong, but actually both of them are valid in some perspective. And when it comes to work itself, I think that the things I'm most afraid of is that looking at a body of work or looking at a design problem that actually with the wrong lens, that I always question myself, is this the right lens to look at this job to be done? Or is this the right lens to actually get this kind of a design workflow process? Is there something I'm missing there? So I think that's really the part that impacted my day-to-day work.
I think I've just over time gotten more comfortable expressing my point of view at work. And I just want to listen to this real quick. I just want to also acknowledge that not everybody's going to feel comfortable bringing their whole self to work for whatever reason, right? There might be an issue of psychological safety, or the culture, you know, might indicate that there's something that's wouldn't be ideal for the person to feel safely to bring everything to work. So number one, I just really want to acknowledge that. But I think for me, what I've been thinking about is how do I help others do that? Because, you know, I've had a fairly long career, and I'm in the position where I can help other people to do that. And so that's been my focus more than me being authentic at work, is just recognizing when somebody's perhaps holding back and they could be helped otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I never saw myself as being like the loudest, most outspoken person in a room. But I do think back through past experiences where I've seen somebody navigate a really complex problem really, really professionally and handled it very well. I think about a specific meeting I was at probably 10 years ago now, where there were probably 40 people in the room between two large companies trying to figure out a really complex problem. And there was just a lot of back and forth. It was very chaotic. And I remember seeing this one person sitting kind of like in the corner, just kind of like absorbing and listening to everything. And then all of a sudden he got up, asked if he could have a couple of minutes, and then he drew some boxes and squares and lines on a whiteboard. And I never seen so many nodding heads all at once, where in my mind, as a young kind of growing designer in my career, I was thinking, man, that was baller. Like that guy, he's like that guy just organized his entire room full of many important people into a solution without trying to overspeak over everyone. So I think as you guys kind of see people that you gravitate to and be inspired by throughout your career, think back to those moments, because you may be able to kind of reflect that in how you saw it, because you may also be able to yield a similar result.
I can expand a little bit upon that. I feel like growing up, a lot of my peers, like my Asian American peers, I grew up in the majority of Asian American environment. A lot of them were just like afraid to challenge things, afraid to speak up. They're just like, oh, just like listen and go with the status quo and just go with the flow and not challenge people, not cause problems. And I used to be like that. I used to be that quiet kid who was just like afraid to speak up and afraid to just like make anybody upset. And then I remember just attending Grace Hopper conference in 2018, and I saw people just like talking on top of each other and trying to like get the job and like going the career and being like really, really aggressive. And I was like, oh, do I need to like be like this to like get what I need in life? And so that's when I started just like I actually started hosting meetups with strangers on the internet on Facebook. And that's how I got comfortable with just like speaking up, talking to strangers and meeting people in real life and just organizing people and just like leading. That's how eventually how I got into Design Buddies, actually, because I would organize these little meetup groups in real life because I just wanted to develop those skills to not be that person who just like dismisses everything or just like doesn't want to speak up. And I feel like it definitely is hard in the beginning, but for anybody kind of struggling with that, just being afraid to speak up, I would just try practicing and talking to people, like doing these public speaking events helped me being really comfortable at interviews and everything too. So it's all about practice and getting feedback. And I always ask myself, what's the worst that can happen? It's like for someone thinks I'm weird, but like, what does that really mean? Is that person my hiring manager? I just like try it out with many people. So I just really push the boundaries, and just as long as I'm not harming anyone, putting my career in jeopardy, I just try to speak up and do whatever I can and try to just inspire others and be an example on the way that they can do it as well. Thank you.
Awesome. I just want to really quickly ask the panelists if we don't mind going just a couple minutes over. I know you're on the West Coast, so hopefully you don't have any end of day meetings, but we got one question in the chat that I think is an amazing question. It would be a great way to close. And I could not have written a better question if I tried. So I'd love to pass it off to Melanie, if you don't mind coming off mute to ask your question live.
Much for all the panelists and UX Come Up for organizing this. It was so awesome to hear all of your stories, and I'd like to hear one more. I think that becoming a leader and realizing that you're a leader can be both empowering and terrifying. And I'd like to ask the question, when did you realize your voice had power? I'd just love to hear a story about a pivotal moment where you realized that you were indeed a leader.
I can go first. For me, it was actually getting over this crippling fear I had of public speaking for decades. I'm not kidding, like crippling. I could barely go into a meeting without like heart palpitations because I was fear being called upon. And I'm talking like even after I was a so-called leader, right? Like I just really had so much angst around speaking and having a voice. And it was when I wanted to talk about this whole hypocrisy between commitment to DEI without actually re-examining our goalposts. I'm talking about just in general in corporate America, not specific to my company. That suddenly I really wanted to talk about that. I really, really wanted to talk about that. And I made myself get over this public speaking fear. I gave the talk, I survived it. And then I started getting all this feedback. And that was the moment that I realized that was the moment when I realized that this had an impact on somebody else besides me.
Yeah, I think I totally second that, because I would say like it's probably like the recent times where I started being a mentor. I wouldn't call a leader, but I would say a mentor or a reflection for someone else, and which is like very I would say new to me, which is probably something that I wasn't doing before, where I'm expressing myself. And early in my career, I never used to turn on my camera. I always used to speak only when asked or called out, and never like bring out my point. Just with a lot of inhibitions and so many thoughts in my mind, like what if this sounds foolish, or what if this is wrong, or what if everyone knows the answer to this except from me, something like that. But when I started talking to other designers, especially on design buddies or ADP list, when I'm trying to talk and express my, like it could just be like reviewing a portfolio or talking about a resume, and when you see the resonance that it's actually helping someone, like you talk to someone and it comes back probably 2 weeks later saying that, hey, whatever you said has helped me, I've gotten a job, or I just went to the next round of an interview, or some sort of like resonance. It's very similar to how we post a picture on Instagram and you see so many likes, and it kind of pumps up all the dopamine in you. It's the same effect that comes from like speaking and expressing and just letting yourself out there, that I've experienced for like the first time when I started talking and helping people, and looking how much impact it's getting to. And it kind of gives you also some sort of self-confidence, and it started improving me as a speaker in my interviews. So it's also like a give and take thing that I've gotten from this, which is like I wasn't like this good before at speaking or like expressing myself. It gotten out of like so much stuff that I've like resonated from people I've spoken to. So it's like a collective thing that kind of happened.
For sharing. I have a really quick story. So I guess that moment was when I was 12 years old, actually. So in middle school, I was actually bullied really bad. Basically what happened was this 8th grade, so I was in 7th grade, this 8th grader stole $500 worth of my Nintendo DS games. And she was a popular kid, and I asked for her back. Nothing happened. I asked for her back. I started being really aggressive because there's like $500 worth of games, and she didn't want to give it back. Instead, she got all her friends to gang up on me, to the point where they're telling me not to live anymore. So I'm not going to get too graphic into that, but it was like a lot of bullying at school, a lot of cyberbullying, and it was like a lot of drama. And yeah, it was really hard, like as a kid, as a 12-year-old, getting all these like threats and stuff from my peers who were older than me, and having all these rumors about the high school, all because I wanted my $500 worth of Nintendo DS games and my finished Legend of Zelda games, stuff like that. And so that taught me a lot. It taught me how to really pick my battles and how I wanted to fight back and who my real friends were. And it really taught me that because running Design Buddy, sometimes we have a lot of trolls on the internet, and it taught me how to like not respond and de-escalate situations, because I had to deal with it since I was 12. And when I was 16, I actually started a blog on Tumblr, shared my story on the internet. And that's when I realized that it kind of went viral, because a lot of people could apparently relate with me. And because of me sharing my story, it helped them feel more validated in their experiences too. And that's when I kind of realized my voice had power, and I can share my story, my struggles, my failures, and what I learned from it to inspire others and help others feel less alone in their situation. And yeah, before that, I was like, oh, I felt really bad for myself. But then I realized I can use this as empowering others as well. So yeah, that's my story. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for the question.
Oh, I want to say, Grace, you really inspire me. Like I feel like whatever you say, yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you.
To answer the question, I want to say that for me, the moment I realized I'm in a leadership position is the time I realized I was a bad leader. It was freshman year at college. I was organizing an event, and when the event was about to happen, I was kind of trying to get a sponsor from the gate of the college to our destination. And I actually went there to greet that person in person and bring that person to the site. After the event, one of the team members talked to me. He said, Roger, at that time, you should ask me to do that. You should stay at the site and be able to observe everything that's going on and make decisions there. So it was a valid feedback. I still remember the person who said that to me. And I think that's the first time I realized, oh, I did something wrong here. And that's the time I feel like, hey, maybe I need to look into this, actually how to be a good leader whenever the circumstances arise.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for sharing their perspectives here. Especially when Grace started bringing up video games, it made me even dial back even further into my life where I played a lot of sports growing up, but I was never like a star player or a captain or like the first selected out of any kind of sports teams. But when I was in college, I started getting into video games a lot more, and I actually ended up creating a Unreal Tournament clan, where we ended up being one of the top in the country just because somebody asked, "Hey, can you create a clan?" And I said yes, and then I didn't realize that there was going to be a lot of leadership around that as far as the administrative work, but also trying to get the team together, and that kind of, I think back to that moment a few times throughout my career, because then on a professional level, there was a point, there are points in my career where the questions to me started changing from this is what we have to do to what should we be doing. And I think once you start getting those kind of questions, it's really helpful to be prepared to know your vision, your North Star, and you'll figure out the different points to get there. So I think once you kind of get the question of what should we be doing, that's when people are looking to you as a leader, and they're looking for your guidance to help them.
Wow. I don't know if people want to come off mute and give a round of applause. I know it's hard to do on Zoom, but I was really so inspired today. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you everyone for joining and for staying a few minutes after. Really hope everyone, had some amazing takeaways about how to be a leader, what it means to be a leader, which I think is a relevant topic for everyone, but while trying to spotlight Asian American voices in our community. So thank you so much everyone for being here, and hope you have a great rest of your week.
This was amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for moderating too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.